Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
On today's episode, we have something that might actually be a first for the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm going to be your host, and our guest is going to be my co-host in a lot of the other episodes, Chris Jennings. Chris, welcome to the podcast, man.
It is great to be a guest on the DU podcast.
There you go. We'll see how you do on this. We might actually invite you back. We wanted to take today's episode as an opportunity to explore in a bit more detail a recent article that Chris wrote for the Ducks Unlimited magazine. It was in the March-April edition, 2021. And it focused on a recent, well, it wouldn't really be recent at this time, but it was maybe a year and a half or so ago at this point, where you went on an RV road trip, duck hunting in your RV. And so we wanted to use this episode to get in a bit more detail on that particular topic. So Chris, I guess to start us off here, we're going to jump right into it. For those that might not have seen that article, might not have read it yet, give us a little bit of background on that, kind of the thinking behind that article, and this is going to get into the overall thing of why you have the RV and what you're doing with that RV.
Doing lots. The article is called Duck Camp on Wheels, and and ironically, it was not even my idea as an article, although it ended up a very fun piece for me. But actually, the editorial director, Matt Young, was like, hey, why don't you do a piece using your RV as like a duck camp, and we'll, do a mobile duck camp type deal. Well, as we started looking into this, that's the whole reason why I got an RV. And I will say one more thing. I've written a lot of different pieces in the magazine, but I've gotten more feedback on this particular article. People have emailed, hey, I've always wanted to do that, turn a camper into a duck camp, or I always wanted to get an RV and travel around and, hunt multiple states and do this. And I was like, yeah, it's awesome. That's why I always tell people, yeah, do it. It's awesome. But I, when we started off on this deal, it was me and a buddy of mine, Landon Simmons, who we hunt together a lot. And the plan was to do multi-states, multiple days, this big long journey where we were going to go out and hunt different habitats and hunt with some different people that we knew. And the whole thing kind of changed a little bit. And even in the story, we talk about how, the hunting was really good in Arkansas. So we stayed, which is part of the reason that I push people for the RV experience with the duck camp is you don't have to make reservations. You've probably been on hunts before where, you have to make reservations at a hotel and, you don't want to miss those reservations. Well, when you're in your own RV and you're off site, you're not necessarily at a park or an RV park. You can just stay 3 days. Well, let's stay 5. If the hunting's really good, let's just stay. Well, that's kind of what we did in the piece. It explains that the hunting was really good. We were hunting flooded timber in Arkansas, and it was fantastic. Probably some of the best that I've ever been. And we're like, well, let's just scratch Missouri off the list of states we're going to visit. And so we did, and we stayed. And then, we went up to Tennessee, actually into Kentucky, and hunted with Kelly Powers, a couple days after that. And then Landon, my buddy, owns a business here in Memphis, and he got a call like, man, you got to come home. It was an emergency within the business. But again, it really played into the RV, the on-the-go duck hunter, the hey, let's just go until we can't go anymore. And as soon as you get the phone call, let's leave. And that's exactly what we did. We got the phone call. We only got to hunt one day with Kelly Powers up there in Kentucky. And then we had to leave. And so we just loaded up the RV and took off. And that was the whole essence of it, is just that freedom, which I'm really into. I know I'm not the only person. It's highly popular, very popular throughout the whole country. But it also gave us an opportunity to tell a quick story about how people were maybe socially isolating during duck season, and give people some options who maybe not feel comfortable moving forward. I had a couple buddies who had deer camps that they never went to deer camp because the camp set up was
during 2020, during the pandemic.
That's right. Because the camp setup wasn't necessarily CDC safe. Yeah. Let's say that. And they were uncomfortable. It was older, an older group. And people missed out on some of these experiences where even at my duck camp in 2020, for opening day, we have a little house that we rent, me and some buddies, and there's like 7 or 8 people that usually stay in this 2-bedroom house. 2-bedroom, 1 bath, Arkansas farmhouse is tight.
Yeah.
You don't want
some of those.
Yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, in November of 2020, there was still quite the concern. And I loaded up my RV and parked it on a little gravel road just across the street from our duck camp and talked to a farmer over there. And I stayed over there for opening weekend for 2 nights, and I never went in the house. Now, some of the other guys did. But that was an approach for me to, maybe play it safer. And what this article did is it really gave me an opportunity to kind of share my experiences with the RV and as a duck camp and some of the gear and, maybe some things that you shouldn't do. There's a couple little funny mentions in there, but
the tail whip, I believe, is
yeah. I mean, it happens.
You have to go read the article.
Yeah, it happens. But another thing about it is that's cool is you're completely self-contained. You're cooking. We'd open the windows and like you could just hear specks and snows, and they were 50 yards away. Yeah, pouring into a field at night, and the whole that's a good thing and a bad thing until there's about 10,000 of them sitting right next to the RV. Luckily, the generator droned out some of those, but that it was a really cool experience and it's something I was excited to share in the magazine and hope it got people to really think about maybe some other options rather than just a normal duck camp that stays in one place.
Right. No, I really appreciated that aspect of it. I do encourage people to go read the article. It's the March-April issue of 2021, and you'll get a bit more of the story from these individual hunts. But what we wanted to do here is just explore a little more of what got you into this, expose other people to the idea of this, of the potential to use RVs as another way of getting around and making your way to your hunting destinations. And it had never occurred to me, I guess in an explicit manner, that people did this. Now, it seems odd for me to say that, but yeah, it just never occurred to me. And I say it's odd for me personally because my parents had an RV, and my dad would always use it for, my mom and dad would use it to travel and do vacation things together, but he would use it annually at the lake. He would take it down to a lake and stay there for 4 to 6 weeks and go fishing during the crappie spawn. And so he used it for that same type of thing. But it never occurred to me that people are doing the same thing or could do the same thing with duck hunting across the country. And, clearly they can. So what inspired you? Where did you first hear of this? Was it a friend of yours, an acquaintance of yours that had that you saw doing this, or have you seen other people do it? Or just how did you come into this idea of, I want an RV so I can be more mobile during my waterfowl hunting?
Yeah, that's interesting. And it never really dawned on me over the years until I have a buddy that I went to high school with. He actually lives in South Florida. He lives in Jupiter, Florida now. And we grew up hunting together. Obviously, in South Florida, he's not doing a ton of duck hunting, but he always wanted to come and hunt with me. Well, I had a little lease in North Mississippi right outside of Tunica. And he called and he's like, hey, I want to come up and hunt. I'm like, all right, well, you can stay at my house. He's like, no, I'm bringing my RV. I'm like, oh, okay. And that was the first time I'd been in his RV, and he has like a bigger A-class, like super fancy 40 plus feet. It is very nice. And so he drove up with another one of his friends from South Florida to come and hunt with me. Well, I ended up just staying with them on the RV, so I didn't have to make the 1.5-hour drive from my house. And it was just an eye-opener. It was, they brought...
The wheels were turning immediately.
Yeah. We're sitting in where my duck lease was, it was basically across the street from where Harris Casino used to be, and on Highway 61. And we camped basically in the parking lot at Samstown Casino, which they offer a whole little RV park.
They have a hookup there?
Yeah.
So you don't have to use a generator.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that was there. And so we're staying down there, and he's, he brought trailers and boats and all this stuff with his RV, four-wheelers. And, I was just like, man, this is like, he's coming from South Florida. Imagine what you could do 3-4 hours from home. And so, that really kind of got the wheels turning. And then over the years I had kids, and that kind of changed the dynamic of my hunting approach, how long I can be gone, where I was going. And so my wife and I got this idea like, hey, we should get one. And so we went into that. But then I also, kind of the unique aspect of that is not only was I looking for a camper / RV for camping with the kids and doing outdoor things, but I was also going into this as like, during duck season, this is going to be my duck camp, and so I took a very unique approach to it, I will say. And in doing so, I think I mentioned in the story, and if not, you and I have talked about it, that my wife and I looked for almost 3 years before we found one that fit everything that we wanted in an RV. And we wanted an A-class, not necessarily an A-class, but something that was drivable. And I didn't really want to pull behind. I didn't really want a fifth wheel. There's some drawbacks to each one of those. There's some plus sides to each one of those.
Yeah. So this is probably I want to get into a lot of those considerations because you did write about it in the article that you looked for about 3 years. It might have been in one of the sidebars, but anyway, you did mention it took you a while to actually to find what you were looking for, and this is an important purchase. It's not like just going and buying a bicycle, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is something that you put a lot of thought in, and there are tons of options, right? Yep. And so with all those options come a variety of trade-offs. And so I guess I wanted to get you to share a little bit behind your thinking, some of the choices that you made, because my parents have a fifth wheel, and so it's a pull behind, connected to the truck, and so the what went through your mind in evaluating just that? Why did you want the Class A versus a fifth wheel?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I will just say, if anyone's out there looking, this is a process. You're trying to make a million different things fit exactly what you want.
We're not going to go through all million things.
No, that's what I wanted to say. I'm not going to go through all of it. So I don't want an email saying, oh man, you forgot to mention this. Well, the big thing for us, for my wife and I, we travel a lot and we have family all over the country, and we're taking my truck. And now currently I've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, but that started out with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. Stopping at the bathroom, with 2 little girls, we're stopping. I mean, we'd joke that I had to stop twice before I got to Osceola, Arkansas, which is about 35 minutes from Memphis. And if you're in a fifth wheel, or even just a regular pull behind camper, you're still in the truck with the A-class, or a C-class too. It's more of an open cabin. You can get up and go to the bathroom. Obviously you can't if you're driving, but someone else can get up and go use the restroom. You don't have to stop. Yeah. So once we get in there, and this is something that someone told me, and I don't want to take credit for it, but the way that we looked at it and the way that it was explained to me was people with a pull behind camper, they're on vacation when they get to the campground and get set up. When we pull out, we're already on vacation. The girls are sitting, on the either couch where there's, safety belts, or the table where there's safety belts, but they're already doing activities at a table. They're not stuck in the car. So it really makes it a much more enjoyable ride for them, and me, because I'm going to have to stop every 20 minutes. So like your mindset just goes, as soon as you pull out of the driveway, we're rolling, we're on vacation. And if we want to stop, you stop and do whatever, however you want to handle it. It's that mentality that really made me go with an A-class.
Now, the obvious trade-off there would be that once you get to your camping location, it's not as easy to then pick up and just run down to the gas station or something of that nature if you have a Class A versus if you have the fifth wheel or another pull-behind, right?
Absolutely. And that is the big trade-off. Now, we have tow vehicle, obviously. Yeah. For this particular article, we didn't use it because we had John Hoffman, who's the Ducks Unlimited photo editor. Yeah. he was there as well shooting photos. So we're like, John, you're going to have a truck. I'm just not even going to bring, because with your duck hunt, you still have to have a truck for decoys and, towing trailers, things like that. We're not going to do that you're not going to pick up your camper and go and do that.
Right.
But, you're right. That is the trade-off. That's the big deal that people have to think about. And you almost, have to have another car.
Yeah. Or
rent. I've done that too. I've traveled places to hunt or fish and rented a vehicle knowing that, someone like Enterprise will come and pick you up at the RV park once you get there and you have a vehicle for a week or however long you're going to be there. So, that's definitely the trade-off.
What would be another one or two of the most important considerations or criteria that you and your family had identified? And price is an option in every kind of decision we make. And so we're not going to go to that. There's a relationship between all the different features and size of the vehicle and all that kind of stuff with price. So we'll just assume that price is a factor in everything we do. But from a feature perspective and with respect to maybe a bit more of as you were thinking about, well, I want to use this for waterfowl hunting, being more mobile in that regard. Were there any other criteria that really stood out to you as being important for ensuring it met those needs from a mobile waterfowl hunting camp, you could say?
Yeah, I think, contrary to what my wife knew, I'm going into this with a little bit different perspective. But there were some things storage-wise where, waterfowl hunting is gear intensive, even if you're not talking decoys, but you're talking just guns, ammo, clothing, waders, things that you're not just going to leave outside. That was something that I took into account with this, is I was really, and the way that I got around that really was also with the same way that we convinced ourselves that this was the right layout internally, because the layout that we got has 2 bunk beds, which is for our 2 girls, and they absolutely love it. They would live in that thing if we would let them. But when they're not there, I can fold that top bunk down, and now you have a massive closet for gear. And that's exactly, I cover the beds with old sheets, and you can put boots in there. You can hang up waders. It has a bar that you can put in to where you turn it into a huge closet. Guns, ammo, everything's going in it. So it's not in your way. Because again, one thing that I always stress to people about the RV mentality is you kind of approach it. I don't know if you've been on a big boat, some of the larger boats. It's like you're living on a boat.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's spacious, but it's not that big. Your space is still limited. And so you have to know where you're going to keep everything. Where are you going to keep, we did a snow goose hunt a couple years ago where we're bringing 6 cases of ammo. Well, where do you put 6 cases of ammo? It's tough to store large items like that. So you just have to go into it knowing that you have a space for everything. And that was my justification for the layout that we have with the 2 bunks, was also I need storage because I'm thinking about it from a waterfowling.
Yeah, and they make these things with all the features you can imagine now. The automatic leveling is probably standard on these things now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it makes it a lot easier to get set up. Waterfowl hunting is a muddy venture. So, and so you mentioned the old sheets and all that kind of stuff. Any other special precautions? Any other tips for people that may have an RV, a Class A or fifth wheel or other pull behind? Any tips for them with regard to some of these challenges that may be preventing them from thinking about using their RV in this manner?
Yeah, I mean, and one thing that just to talk about the storage, the external storage, my particular RV does have like 6 external storage spaces. Now, granted, let's say during the summer, spring, early fall, those storage spaces are filled with toys. There is everything from sand bucket bags to, big boxes of markers, and they're stored. Well, as that season changes, and it happens quick because, we like to camp in the fall as well as a family. But then all of a sudden it's time to go to duck season. You can take all that stuff out, and I, line those storage compartments with trash bags. And you don't have to, obviously. But like you said, you go into this knowing what duck hunting is.
Yeah.
It is a muddy mess. At least most of the places that I hunt. And even the interior. Now, that's one trade-off that I did get. We got a great deal on this. That's how we ended up with it. So we made a few trade-offs. One thing that my wife and I both wanted in an RV was complete, like hardwood or laminate throughout. I didn't want any carpet. Well, it's about 75% carpet.
Yeah.
But I'm conscious of that. So, when I'm taking it on a duck hunting trip, I have a trash bag full of blankets that I keep in my garage, where I grab this big trash bag, and it's all just kind of junky blankets. I cover the entire floor with blankets.
Yeah.
Because you step outside I forgot something out there. I grab something, I step back in, and you've got that gumbo mud smeared into carpet.
Yeah.
Not that it can't be taken out, but you get enough.
But you just don't want to do. Yeah.
No, you just don't want to deal with it. Yeah, you don't want. And one email that I got from a magazine reader was dogs. He's like, "Hey man, you forgot to mention how cool it is to take your dog. Having a dog in a hotel room or at another duck camp, dogs don't like that. I mean, my dog specifically, she's pretty spoiled." And I didn't get into that, how convenient it is for dogs. One thing that I've talked to Mike Stewart about on a podcast is, being able to travel with the dogs and having your dogs in an RV. It's so cool because they're comfortable. They're comfortable around you. They're familiar. But that's one other thing to think about as well is you pull a dog from a rice field or a flooded cornfield or, any marsh or swamp and get right in the RV, that's bad business. That is, you don't want to trash the thing. So, you have to think about all that going into it because mine specifically is not just a duck camp, but it's a duck camp when I want it to be a duck camp. And that's the unique aspect of it.
And so remind me, how many years have you had the RV now?
I've had it for two and a half.
Okay, basically. 2.5 years. So you're still relatively new with this particular RV. And I have a few other questions here that I wanted to touch on. But before we move on to this, any other big tip for waterfowl hunters that may want to use their RV as a mobile duck camp that wouldn't have been covered in the article?
Yeah, I think really finding one, I think the big thing is just finding the fit. Finding the fit for you, financials aside, finding the right sleeping quarters, finding the right, setup, like you said, storage. I think that's what I would tell people is go into it with the expectation of how you're going to use it and approach the search that way.
So I've never searched for we don't own an RV. I've never really thought about purchasing an RV, so I've never gone into the RV search process, and so I have no idea what this looks like. Can you test drive these things? Like, can you go to, just like every other kind of vehicle that you're going to buy and test drive them and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, all over the country. And, I put it in the article, but the gorving.com, I brought that up in mainly because you can go on there and you can look at the 100 different types. I mean, even in the article, we didn't get into, pull behinds, pop-ups, fifth wheels, B class, A class, C class. I mean, you can really get into exactly what you're looking for. But there's a lot to it. So I always recommend people just go RVing or ask someone who does it regularly, because you kind of get feedback. I have friends who have fifth wheels and they would never get an A class. But for us, we would probably never get a fifth wheel.
Yeah.
So, it's just what you want and what you need, and what your expectations for using it.
Another thing you mentioned in the article related to this is that it's a pretty challenging time to be trying to buy one of these things right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody and their brother seems to be wanting one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to take some patience.
Yeah, it is. It takes patience, but the popularity really surged. And there was one thing in the article that got cut. Editors tend to do that.
Yeah.
Especially
they would probably say we tend to be a bit verbose with our writing.
That's right. But a guy, I talked to a guy, and he's actually a buddy of mine who owns an RV dealership in Georgia. And he mentioned that he, couldn't keep him on the lot during 2020. People, and he was calling them isolation campers, because people still wanted to do things. They wanted to get out, but they also didn't want to get around people. So people were buying RVs and not necessarily RVs, but mainly pull behinds, any variation of it that fit their needs. They were buying it so that in one particular instance, he told me of a guy who wanted to still go to deer camp. And so he bought a camper and just parked it outside his deer camp. Well, that's basically the mentality I used for duck season. But that's what people were getting, and they became so popular. I mean, they're breaking records. I can't speak necessarily to the exact numbers of sales and all that. It's not necessarily my business.
We can Google that. It's out there.
They're so popular that you had a hard time finding good deals online. And normally you can find a used RV or camper or whatever. I mean, they're readily available. I mean, there's websites out there, but yeah, I mean, the popularity just soared in the last year.
Another item that you mentioned in the article, and it's probably, it's definitely a consideration, but it may be something that is preventing some people from using their RV in this manner. And that is where can you find places to park these things once once you get to your destination? And I would venture to guess that the development of these mobile applications and the internet and sort of the gig economy has just revolutionized the way people are thinking about and searching for and finding places to park their RVs whenever they go abroad. So to talk about that in terms of where you like to stay, what are the different options? Like you talk about if you've got a duck camp or a deer camp that has some spare room beside the existing structure or whatever, that's one thing. But if you're just going out to some other faraway location, the Dakotas, for example, what are the type of places that you would be thinking about as your home base,
There's tons of apps out there. Obviously, you can use apps. I use one called RV Parky a lot just for normal travels. But, I mean, you can look at KOAs. I'm a big fan of state parks. State parks offer, if you're going to stay I think I told someone just a couple of weeks ago, and they were asking about staying at a state park. And I was like, well, just know what you get into with a state park. When you go to a state park, most of them are not going to have cable. They're not going to provide Wi-Fi. So then you go the complete opposite spectrum of what my article was about, where I'm basically staying in a farmer's field. You can go to that other side and start looking at like the KOA style, or even there's these private RV parks that you can find that have, full hookup, water, sewage, electricity, cable, Wi-Fi. Some of these places have, individual pools and spas set up at each spot. I mean, it can get as wild as you possibly can imagine. Now you pay more for that. But, if you were looking at state parks or even Corps property, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they have a fantastic network of RV, which is probably where your dad, you mentioned.
Yep, sure was.
And we stay at a lot of Corps properties. But if I'm going to North Dakota, I'm going to map that out. From here in Memphis, I'm going to map out probably 2 days at least of driving, maybe 3 at a hunt in there, or 4, because it is a haul from here. 19, 20, 22 hours, whatever it might be. But, I'm going to map that out based on places to stay, like you said. So I'm going to be looking online. I mean, you can just Google RV parks and it'll pop up. It's much easier. I couldn't imagine doing this in the 70s or 80s where, everything's based on a book, a printout that you had to probably pay $50 for the book and then search. Now we find them as we're going down the road. I'm telling my wife like, hey, I'm tired. Let's stop.
Yeah.
And we found one within 5 minutes. So.
And there's something similar to the Airbnb now, where I've seen the property owners are offering up spots on their property, whether it be a farm that has a large equipment area and they've got plenty of space out there. I assume they register much the way the Airbnb providers do. So there's all sorts of options right now. Finding a place to stay has probably never been more flexible and more easy, right?
Yeah, no, and I can't remember the name of that, but I've seen it as well. Wineries,
Yeah, that's right.
Farms, some of these different variations of agricultural properties are saying, hey, yeah, you can stay here. Now, granted, they're not providing water, electricity, or sewage, but that's where a vehicle like mine, which is completely self-contained, which I get into in the article. That's why I got that vehicle, because I wanted to be able to bring my own water, run my own electricity. I can run generator as long as I can keep that gas filled. So that's something for people to look at when they get into it. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to find places. I mean, in reality, up in North Dakota, I mean, you can find a little gravel road as long as it's not a through road and you get permission to park there from a farmer. You're set for 3 or 4 days.
We're going to start wrapping this up here, but I do have a couple of other questions. We could talk. We haven't even really touched much about how you and your family use the RV during those other 3 seasons of the year, and because I know y'all do a lot of traveling at it, both locally and a bit more regionally. But I wanted to these next few questions kind of are not restricted to waterfowling per se, but you can subdivide this however you want to. So the first question I have is, what's the longest trip that you've made thus far? It can be including your entire family and just sort of completely recreational or waterfowling, and then what's the dream trip that you are imagining or that you're in the process of planning?
The farthest trip that I've taken it is. My parents live in South Florida. They're snowbirds. So, obviously we've taken it back to where I'm from in Indiana. We take it back during the summer a couple times and visit up there even for a weekend. But during the winter, they live in South Florida. So we go down there one time. We went last year and then this year. That's a haul. It's, I think from Memphis there, if you look on Google, it says like 15 hours. But you have to remember, one thing for everyone to remember is, when you're driving an RV like this, you're not going 75, 80 miles an hour.
You're going 95, right?
Yeah, 100. No. I'm very cautious, and I'm typically tucking in behind a semi going about 65 to 68 miles per hour, and you're cruising. Yeah. And you don't really realize how much time you lose. And especially when you're on a 16-hour drive, you're adding an hour and a half here. And stopping to refill gas takes a lot longer, and so there's things like that you have to keep in mind. But that's probably the longest. Obviously, we've taken it to Disney, which is awesome. That's off the waterfowling topic, and that can be a show in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's a really cool.
That could be a season in itself.
Yeah, I mean that's a really cool place for RVs. They have a place called Fort Wilderness. That's awesome. But we take it down to South Florida, stay out on Pine Island. My parents live right there. They have a boat right there. So we go and we stay on the island down there for a week, not quite that long. Takes us a little longer to travel down and back. So we stay down there for about 4 or 5 days and travel for 2 or 3 days. But yeah, and then as far as planning.
Or dream trip.
The dream trip. Man, everyone always wants to go out west. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if my dream is to take it out west. That's not necessary. I'm a Midwestern. I don't trust high mountains. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Everything that I've ever enjoyed doing has been at pretty
You're
low.
Afraid the brakes are going to give out on the way down?
No, I don't know. I mean, we spend a lot of time.
Probably a movie about that somewhere,
I know.
Right?
We spend a lot of time in coastal Louisiana. I spend a lot of time in Indiana. I mean, the highest elevation I'm getting here is about 290 feet. So I'm a flatlander, I guess.
What about the prairies?
Prairies is awesome. As far as a duck hunting trip, I think
you'd have to have somebody go with you, right? Or else do a pull behind.
You would. I think
like for your class A, you would need a tow. What do you call it? A tow behind vehicle?
Yeah, you have they call them toads, but okay. You have a tow vehicle that
TOWED, not TOAD, right?
Actually, they spell it toad, but I don't. Yeah, we'll not get into the grammatics of that. But no, I think what would be really cool. I think a lifetime trip, if I was looking at planning one big trip, would be like, and you'd have to do it on a course of maybe 20 days or more if you could get off that long. But to work your way up through Canada, once the border opens, you go up there and you hit some of those Ducks Unlimited Canada projects up there, doing diver hunts and maybe shooting some upland in the afternoons. But you're camped, your RV is up there off grid, you're not necessarily, now you could probably find great RV parks.
Yeah.
One thing that I would have with my rig that you have to keep in mind for duck season is the cold weather's rough on those things unless they're prepared for it.
I didn't realize that. Like you mean in terms of the insulation in the walls?
That's right.
Really?
Mine's not as in, now I have buddies who have, heaters underneath and, they can go to Maine for a month in January.
I didn't realize that.
Mine's not set up that way. It's not that fancy. So I have to be pretty careful. Once I get to about, 20 degrees, 25 for a day or more, I need to start looking at, clearing water lines and,
Really?
lots of RV antifreeze.
Yeah,
but it's
I
a
guess I
quick
didn't think of
process
that.
to do. But that's something for people to keep in mind too. You're not just going to set this thing up for duck camp and it's going to work like it does in July. You're constantly having to pay attention to things like that, or buy one that you don't have to worry about. But that would be a cool long-term trip. Go up to Canada. You could work your way through the prairies.
Yeah.
In the RV and do it kind of early in the season so you don't have to worry about a lot of that. And if you do see weather coming,
Yeah, you can tuck tail
can
and
always
come
take
on
off.
back. And I said you would have to have a tow behind or a toad, but that wouldn't necessarily be the case as long as you had somebody else meeting you or that you were meeting in Canada, to provide that local transportation. It's not like you could take that thing out into a prairie wheat field.
No.
Have you ever gotten it stuck?
I have, yeah. I had only owned it for a little while, and I went up to Indiana. My parents lived there during the summer, obviously. They live on a lake that it's like a little recreation park, I guess. And they just had like a big field. And it was the first time I took it up there. And my dad's like, you can just park it in the field. And I got about 10 inches off the asphalt, and that thing just sunk. So you can see it in the picture how big it is. I mean, it's pretty good size. And that thing just sank like almost to the frame. And I had to call a tow truck. I wasn't there in Indiana 20 minutes and already had to call a tow truck to get me pulled out.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great. All right, 2 more questions here. I'll wrap them into one. Favorite part of being an RV owner and least favorite part of being an RV owner?
Okay. Yeah, no. Favorite part, come duck season, snow goose season. I'm not looking at it as, hey, I'm going to go hunt today. It's like, hey, where can I go and spend 2 days? And the potential to hunt and, to be able to call a friend in Missouri or in Arkansas or even in Indiana and say, hey, I'm going to come up for a day, turn around, hunt in Kentucky on the way home with another friend, be home. And then being able to do that at the same time during the spring and summer with the family. I mean, that's awesome. Just being able to go whenever you want to. Least favorite part, one thing that I've learned, there's a reason why the majority of the people who own these things are retired.
Why's that?
Because you spend a lot of time messing with it. There's always something to do. I could spend every day working on it in some capacity, whether it's internal, external, chassis work. I change the oil in this thing. And not because I want to necessarily, just out of necessity, usually like, hey, I got to get it done real quick. But I've learned how to do all that. So I like that about it. But it is busy work. Like even when you go camping, there's something that, the lights out. The carpets are pulling up from the floor. Let's fix this. The tile in the bathroom needs to be, it's always something. So that's one thing for people to keep in mind is if you don't have the time to dedicate it or you don't want to dedicate that time, you may want to look at a different option.
I would say that item, that experience rings true for boats.
That's right.
For all sorts of other vehicles and equipment of all sorts, whether it be a tractor. I can speak to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The more you use it,
that's just sort of an understood, or it should be anyway, right?
Yeah. It's just like I always tell people it's like a boat, exactly in the sense that the more you use it, the less you're going to have to work on it.
Yeah.
Because if you let it sit for 6 months and then, I, as a boat owner my whole life, if I didn't use my boat enough, every time I'd go hitch it up, one of the taillights would be out. And I'm like, okay, I got to switch out a taillight. And then it sit for another 3 months. And then but that's the same thing with the RV. If you use it a lot, you'll be aware, you'll be able to work through some of those issues. But if you don't, be prepared to spend a lot of time working on it.
Cool. Chris, this has been fun. I've enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot, and it was kind of fun to reminisce about some of my experiences with my parents' RV and thinking about those, how it would have fared in some of the situations that you were describing, and also just to hear about some of the things that went through your mind whenever you all were selecting it. So thank you, Chris. And I hope people learned a lot from this episode. I'm sure they did.
Yeah, that's been awesome, man. And I tell everybody who's interested in it, do your research. It's an awesome experience, and just get out there, learn more as much as you can about RVs. But man, once you get it, you got your own little mobile duck camp. It's opportunities are endless. So
you're ready to go.
That's right.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. Special thanks to my guest on today's show and our co-host on many other episodes, Chris Jennings. Great insight on his experiences as a RV owner and a mobile duck camp. As always, we thank our producer, Clay Baird, for the great work that he does on this podcast. And to you, the listener, we thank you for joining us, and we thank you for your support, passion, and commitment to wetlands and waterfowl conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.